Yesterday, we got new information on possibly the most coveted player still in the transfer market, Henry To'oTo'o, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. Hop down in the comments and give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that Henry To'oTo'o will end up at the University of Alabama? And let me know why. Y'all, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification as I do constant college football content, whether that's film analysis, player reviews, or general talk style videos like this. And I'm on my push to 2,000 subscribers and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Also, with the NFL draft coming up, I'm going to be branching out into NFL content as well, so you don't want to miss that. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and comment down below because likes and comments go a long ways in helping channels like mine get picked up by the YouTube algorithm. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into it because we have a lot to unpack with the recruitment of Henry To'oTo'o. And it's interesting because yesterday we got new information from 24/7 Sports about the process of the recruitment of Henry To'oTo'o. And now, first and foremost, we need to understand why wherever he goes, he is going to be such a big impact. As a true freshman after that season, he found himself on multiple All-American awards for true freshmen. He is one of the best linebackers in the nation, regardless of age. As a sophomore going into this past season, he was one of 2 sophomores nominated to the Bednarik award-winning watch list, the other sophomore being Derek Stingley Jr. So if that shows you the type of allure this guy carries, Derek Stingley Jr. is in the conversation any year he's playing for the best cornerback in college football as a sophomore. And they put Henry To'oTo'o as the only other sophomore nominated to this prestigious award for the best defender in college football. That's the kind of player we're talking about here. And it's interesting to know that he was the biggest anchor for Tennessee's defense, right? A defense that didn't play well, make no mistake about it. But one of the only bright spots on Tennessee was guys like Wanye Morris, Eric Gray. But Henry To'oTo'o was the catalyst of that defense. Any success they found wasn't based solely on To'oTo'o, but he was the man manning it, and he went out there and gave his all the time. The reason we're talking about him today is because he being in the transfer market, he is experiencing recruitment all over again. And his father was talking yesterday, and Hank South of 24/7 Sports reported on it, and his father said some really interesting things that I would like to get into. And I want to read the quote that his father said. He said, "All the other SEC schools reached out to him too. But the one thing we talked about was that we chose Tennessee the first time when we should have came to Alabama. So let's not make this mistake twice." Now, look, there's the obvious way to interpret this, which is the parents and To'oTo'o have talked about this, and they believe that they made the mistake, obviously the first time, that's what they said, and that they intend to just shore this up and go to Alabama like they should have originally. That's probably the most obvious interpretation, and that's what I believe he's saying, but I do want to keep all doors open and look at it from every possible angle. The only other interpretation that this could say is that when he's saying go to Alabama, that's metaphorically, meaning we want to find the place that's right for us because we found a place that's right for us the first time and we didn't choose that place, and we don't want to make that mistake again. Now, once again, everybody, I don't believe that's the case, because if that was the case, you wouldn't name drop schools. I'm just being as objective about this as I possibly can be. But let's really get down to brass tacks, because the quote said what it said, and that was, "We chose Tennessee the first time when we should have chose Alabama. Let's not make the same mistake twice." I think we can all agree the most likely interpretation of that was my first one, that they didn't go to Alabama the first time, and they will be going to Alabama the second time. This is incredibly interesting because Alabama loses Dylan Moses to the draft. And look, I've been, kind of curious about what the depth is going to be behind Dylan Moses. I'm not worried about Christian Harris, and I'm not necessarily worried about the inside linebacker position because I think there's a lot of good depth. But a Henry To'oTo'o deciding to come in and transfer to the University of Alabama, if he was to win that starting job, Tide fans everywhere would be ecstatic with the prospect of the front 7 of that Alabama defense. I mean, that front 7 would be just as good as any you've seen in a while from any other team. I don't think it compares to those 2015 Alabama squads of recent college football playoff memory. But alas, you get my point. You would have Chris Allen on one side, Will Anderson Jr. on the other, LeBron Ray came back. You lose Barmore up front, but with the commitment of Damon Payne, a 5-star defensive tackle, as well as just waves of guys that have been getting experience in the rotation, the addition of Henry To'oTo'o would really make this defensive front an incredibly experienced defensive front with a lot of younger guys, and that's an incredibly interesting place to be in. Now, it would put Alabama in a situation where both middle linebackers were draft eligible that year in Henry To'oTo'o and Christian Harris. So obviously the future would need to look towards the inside linebacker position and shoring that up in the long term. But there are a lot of names behind those two guys. The biggest question mark right now for Alabama is in the secondary, and what a question mark to have when you just recruited the second best cornerback in the nation from a JUCO standpoint, Kyrie Jackson, who has incredible length. And that's going to be one of the most coveted things, not only in college football, but in the NFL. He's going to be hard to keep off the field, but he's going to be going heads up with JaQuincy McKinstry, who's going to be equally hard to keep off the field. 5-star prospect, #1 cornerback in the nation. The Crimson Tide are sitting in good position right now, and you have to imagine that with the addition of Henry To'oTo'o, any chance they had of winning the East, which already they're the odds-on favorite to win the East. We talked about this yesterday in that video. I expect them to win the East, but this would just solidify it, because as much as, you could point to teams coming back with a good offense, the combination of Christian Harris and Henry To'oTo'o as middle linebackers would be deadly. That is a lot of athleticism. That is a lot of sideline-to-sideline speed, and it would be very similar to Dylan Moses, Christian Harris. And look, they're very high on Pete Golding, and I know Alabama fans have a varied opinion about Pete Golding for various reasons. But the one thing that's hard to do this year is really gauge how Pete Golding is because it was known that they had to change the defense multiple times this year because they didn't get the full offseason. So the beginning portion of the season, Golding was still trying to run his original defense, and they realized it wasn't working because people hadn't learned it yet. Alabama does not run a simple defense. It is impressive that guys like Malachi Moore were still able to learn the Golding defense and play in it over Zoom. And that's exactly why, Tide fans, I think the addition of Henry To'oTo'o really changes the picture when we're talking about this Alabama defense, because it takes what's already an incredibly talented defense with the guys you're losing. You have to be excited about the depth behind them. I mean, as far as from a defensive standpoint, this might be one of the easiest transitions Nick Saban has had in quite some time from a lost talent to replenishing standpoint. You're going to be hard-pressed replacing Pat Surtain and Dylan Moses, Christian Barmore. But when you get LeBron Ray, Chris Allen to come back, and you recruit the #1 corner in the nation, the #2 JUCO corner in the nation, and your freshman in the defensive backfield from last year excelled all expectation, and oh yeah, Malachi Moore might be one of the best defensive backs in the nation, you have to like where you're at if you're a defensive-minded fan for the Alabama Crimson Tide, or a Crimson Tide fan in general. But now I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments and let me know how likely it is do you think that the University of Alabama lands Henry To'oTo'o, because I have to admit, they seem like the odds-on favorite by a mile, and it would be a match made in heaven. That's it. See ya.